Aloha and welcome back to the garden. I'm Miss Amber and I'm excited for you to join me today. If you were with us last class, you might remember learning all about composting. Do you remember the 4 compost ingredients? Greens, browns, water, and air. Nice job. I thought we could start today's class by taking a look at our compost jar and see how it's doing. Let's take a look. At the very beginning, when we finished putting all of our different compost ingredients into our jar, you could still tell what everything was. You could see the apple core and the grass clippings and the dried leaves. But now if we look 1 week later, what do we notice? After just 1 week, we can see so much happening inside of our compost jar. Lots of little critters moving around and breaking down all of the compost material. And now, after 2.5 weeks, what do we notice about our compost jar? After 2.5 weeks, it's hard to tell what anything is anymore. It's all starting to turn brown and look more and more like soil. I wonder how long it will take until it's all broken down. How cool is it that we can take our food and yard waste and mix it all together and watch as the FBI breaks it down for us? Today we're going to be taking a closer look at all of those soil organisms or living things. And we're going to talk about the soil food web. So what is a food web? Well, it's the interconnected relationships between producers, consumers, and decomposers. Now, what does that all mean? Well, to better understand, let's start by looking at a food chain, which is just one layer of a food web. A food chain shows us what an organism or living thing eats and what eats it. For example, in a forest on the mainland, a deer will eat plants, and a deer is eaten by a mountain lion. Now let's take that a step farther. Where do the plants get their energy from? The sun. Plants make their own food by using energy from the sun and a process called photosynthesis, which we're going to learn all about in a later lesson. So our food chain starts with the sun, and the sun gives energy to the plants, and the plants make their own food, and then they give energy to the deer when the deer eats the plants, and the deer gives energy to the mountain lion when the mountain lion eats the deer, and the mountain lion is at the top of this food chain, which means nothing eats it. But eventually, it'll die, and when it dies, what happens to the mountain lion? It decomposes, and our decomposers, our FBI, just like in our compost, help break down that dead animal material to return the nutrients back into the soil. So this is a food chain. Now a food web has many more layers. For example, in our forest food chain, what else eats plants besides deer? Well, maybe a rabbit eats plants in this forest. And so a rabbit eats plants, and maybe that mountain lion would eat that rabbit, but also coyotes might be in this forest, and coyotes would eat those rabbits. And coyotes might also eat a deer, and so those are connected. And then what might eat that coyote? You got it, the mountain lion. And so that mountain lion might eat that coyote. And now we start to see how all of these organisms, all of these living things are connected through our food web. Now, all of these organisms have an important role to play in this food web. They're either a producer, a consumer, or a decomposer. Producers are organisms or living things that produce or make their own energy, their own food, like our plants, right? Our plants don't need to eat other plants or animals to get energy because they get their energy from the sun. Next, we have consumers. And consumers are organisms that get their energy by eating other plants or animals. People are consumers because our food comes from plants and animals. And lastly, we have our decomposers. Do you remember what decomposers eat? Anything that was once alive and is now dead. And so decomposers get their energy by eating and breaking down those dead plant and animal materials. So can you point to the producers in this food web? Nice job, they're the plants. And how about the consumers? Can you point to the consumers in this food web? Nice job. The consumers are the deer, the rabbit, the coyote, and the mountain lion. How about the decomposers? Excellent. The decomposers are those FBI, the fungus, bacteria, and invertebrates. Nice job. So all organisms are connected in food webs like this one. So now that we know what a food web is, let's look at our soil food web. So we know that there are fungus, bacteria, and invertebrates in our soil. But how are they all connected? Well, like every food web, our soil food web starts with the sun. And what gets its energy from the sun? Plants. So plants are the producers in our soil food web. Next, we want to find the organisms in the soil that eat the plants. These are going to be invertebrates like pill bugs, sow bugs, fruit flies, slugs, and snails. These are our consumers because they consume or eat the producers, which are the plants. But consumers also include organisms that eat other animals or that eat both plants and animals. And this includes invertebrates like centipedes and spiders and ground beetles and ants. And lastly, we have our decomposers. And these are the organisms that eat the dead and decaying plant and animal material. And these are going to be our organisms like worms and millipedes and fungus and bacteria. So now that we know our soil producers, consumers, and decomposers, let's build our soil food web. Like all food webs, what does this one start with? The sun. And the sun gives its energy to our producers, which are the plants. Nice job. So the sun gives energy to the plants, and maybe the plants start to get eaten by some pill bugs and some fruit flies. And then a fruit fly gets caught in a spider's web, and the spider eats the fruit fly. And maybe the pill bug is eaten by a centipede, but the centipede might also eat that spider. And so now we can start to see our soil food web forming. And then what happens when maybe that centipede dies? Well, it decomposes, right? And our decomposers will break that centipede down and turn its nutrients back into the soil. Or maybe that centipede gets eaten by a bird, and our food web could continue outside of our soil. Do you see how it's all connected? All of these soil organisms are so important because without them, there would be nothing to break down all of the dead things in nature and return those nutrients back to the soil for the living plants to be able to grow. Some of my favorite soil organisms are worms, and worms are great decomposers because they can eat up to half their body weight in a whole day. Can you imagine that? And as they wiggle around through the soil, they create little tunnels that help air and oxygen get into the soil. I'm excited to have some special guests with us today who are going to teach us how to build a worm bin and share some fun facts about worms. Here's Miss Lacey and her friends.
Hi, I'm Lacey with Grow Some Good.
Hi, I'm Gabe. Hi, I'm Tabby. This is Tabby, and I'm Phoebe.
And what are we making today?
A worm bin!
A worm bin! What's a worm bin?
A worm bin is a bin full of worms.
Full of worms. And what else did we put in our worm bin?
We put in newspaper, and when we want to put in some food, I have eggshells in the bag. And I have some banana peels, and we have some watermelon here that we're going to give to the worm.
And what would happen to this banana peel if we didn't put it in the worm bin? Where would we put it?
In the trash.
In the trash. And then it would just get wasted in the landfill where it would create methane gas, which warms the planet really quickly. So a much better use for your food waste, or green waste, is to make your own worm bin. And then what do the worms give us after we give them?
Soil.
They give us soil. That's what our banana peel and our old watermelon and our newspaper is going to turn into. So today we'll put in a little bit of the watermelon. And can we break the banana up into smaller pieces?
Can I put the egg?
You want to just put the whole thing in? Okay. Yep, and we also, oh yeah, we didn't tell you what's in this mysterious bag. Kate, can you tell everybody?
Eggshells.
Eggshells. Why are we going to put eggshells in there?
So they can turn into soil.
They're going to turn those into soil too. And the worms really like to have a little bit of something called grit, like eggshells, to help with their digestion. So they're not just eating mushy newspaper, mushy watermelon. They need something that's a little bit more hearty every once in a while.
Okay.
So we crumble them up. Can you pour them in my hands? And I'll make sure they're really tiny.
Put the eggshells in.
Spread those around in there. Okay. And the banana peel, we're going to pull it into just a few more pieces, like that. Okay. We'll put that in there. Anywhere you want. Put some watermelon in. You want the inside of your worm bin to feel damp, but not too damp. You don't want the worms to drown. So if you take a handful of your worm bin material, you might be able to squeeze out 1 drop of water, but you shouldn't be able to squeeze out more than that. And now we're ready for the worms. Gabe, can you tell everybody who's watching the video, can you tell them what do we do before we touch worms?
We have to get them wet.
Get what wet? Get
Our
our
hands wet.
Get our hands wet, because worms breathe through their skin. So if your hands are too dry, then the worms might not be able to breathe very well while you're handling them. Now you can scoop some out and carefully put them in their new home.
What are these ones called?
These are red wiggler worms, or red trout worms.
How cool is that? Thank you, Miss Lacey and friends. If you're planning on building a worm bin at home, here are some important reminders of what to do and what not to do with your worm bin. Remember, worms like to have a home that is dark and moist, so remember to water your worm bin frequently and make sure that your bin has a lid to keep it nice and dark. Feed your worms with 1 to 2 small handfuls of food per week. And on occasion, remember to give them some more eggshells so they can break down that food that they're eating. And you may need to add some extra shredded paper when it starts to get low, or you can add a little bit on top of the food each week when you feed your worms. This helps keep other animals from getting interested in that food. Don't forget to water the worms, and try not to over or underfeed them. If there's still some food in your worm bin, you can maybe wait a few days before adding more food. We don't want to give our worms any salty, oily, or spicy foods, or a lot of citrus, things like oranges and lemons and limes. And it's not good to give our worms animal products like meat, cheese, milk, any sort of dairy, except for those eggshells. And lastly, don't forget to drill some holes in your worm bin so that way your worms can have plenty of air. I hope you had fun learning all about worms. I just think it's so amazing how much is happening underneath the ground. Who knew the soil was so alive? Mahalo for joining me in the garden today, and aloha. I'll see you next time.